The night the Alpha King finally looked up, an entire kingdom forgot how to breathe. The Crystal Moon Gala had always been a celebration of tradition, elegance, and carefully hidden ambition. Every autumn, beneath the silver glow of the harvest moon, the grand ballroom of Blackwood Palace welcomed the most influential alpha families from every corner of the Northern Territories. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like frozen stars overhead, their reflections dancing across polished marble floors so flawless they mirrored every graceful step. Musicians filled the air with gentle strings while servants carried silver trays filled with sparkling cider and handcrafted desserts through the sea of velvet gowns and tailored suits. Every smile concealed a purpose. Every conversation carried the weight of alliances waiting to be formed. Yet despite the beauty surrounding them, no one could stop stealing glances toward the throne at the far end of the ballroom. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood sat perfectly still beneath the towering banners of his royal house. His black suit was simple compared to the jeweled attire of the nobles surrounding him, but somehow that simplicity only made him appear even more commanding. His silver-gray eyes remained fixed on the moonlight spilling through the towering windows, distant and unreadable. For nearly 5 years, the king had attended every royal gathering without accepting a single invitation to dance. Mothers whispered that he had become impossible to impress. Young alpha heirs quietly admitted they feared standing within 10 feet of him. Even accomplished diplomats struggled to hold his attention for more than a few polite sentences. It was said that the Alpha King's wolf had grown so disciplined that neither beauty nor status could stir it anymore. Many believed the moon goddess herself had forgotten to create the woman capable of reaching him. Across the ballroom, Emily Carter adjusted the sleeve of her pale blue dress and quietly reminded herself to breathe. She had never imagined receiving an invitation to Blackwood Palace. She wasn't royalty. She wasn't the daughter of an alpha bloodline. She wasn't even attending as a guest of honor. Emily had been invited because the Royal Arts Council requested one final traditional dance before the evening's closing ceremony. And after years of studying Forgotten Moon Festival choreography at the Palace Archives, she had become the only performer who still remembered every movement exactly as it had been written centuries ago. That knowledge earned her a single evening beneath crystal chandeliers before she would quietly return to her ordinary life among dusty bookshelves and ancient manuscripts. She preferred it that way. Attention had never brought her comfort. Before entering the ballroom, the elderly curator who had mentored her for years had gently squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever happens tonight," he whispered, "remember one thing. Never look directly into the Alpha King's eyes. The court has many rules, but that one is older than all the others." Emily had smiled politely, assuming it was another palace superstition passed from one generation to the next. Still, as she stepped carefully across the polished marble floor, she obeyed without question, keeping her eyes lowered while the orchestra welcomed the newest arrivals. Around her, noble women displayed gowns embroidered with silver thread, while decorated alpha heirs competed to appear confident beneath the king's silent observation. Conversations drifted through the ballroom like soft waves. Speculation about political marriages mixed with compliments about jewelry, estates, and upcoming ceremonies. Nobody noticed the quiet archivist standing near the musicians. Nobody expected history to remember her name before sunrise. The conductor raised his hand. The opening notes of the ancient moon waltz floated through the ballroom, delicate as falling snow. Emily stepped toward the center exactly as rehearsed, graceful without seeking admiration, calm without demanding attention. She believed she would simply perform, bow politely, and disappear into the crowd once the music ended. She never realized that somewhere across the ballroom, for the first time in years, the Alpha King's wolf had opened its eyes. Emily moved exactly as the old manuscripts had described, each measured step following a tradition that had survived centuries of changing kingdoms. Her pale blue skirt drifted gently across the polished marble, while silver moonlight spilled through the towering windows, making every careful turn seem almost weightless. She had practiced this dance hundreds of times alone inside the quiet palace archives where only shelves of forgotten books had witnessed her mistakes. Tonight, however, hundreds of watchful eyes followed every movement. She reminded herself that they were watching the performance, not her. That thought steadied her breathing. The orchestra continued with quiet confidence as violins blended with the soft notes of the piano, filling the grand ballroom with a melody that felt older than memory itself. Around the edges of the dance floor, nobles whispered politely behind practiced smiles. Some admired the elegance of the ancient choreography, while others seemed more interested in discussing alliances that might be announced before the evening ended. Emily allowed those voices to fade into the background. The music was all that mattered. When the first sequence reached its graceful conclusion, she lowered her head in a respectful bow, expecting to step quietly aside exactly as rehearsed. Instead, another melody began before she could leave the center of the ballroom. It was warmer, lighter, inviting every guest to participate rather than simply observe. Gentle applause filled the hall as young couples stepped forward to join the traditional social dance. Emily instinctively took one small step backward, hoping to disappear into the growing crowd before anyone noticed her. "May I have this dance?" The voice was calm, respectful, and close enough to surprise her. She looked up to find a young man offering his hand with an easy smile. Ethan Brooks belonged to one of the oldest beta families in the kingdom. His reputation had never been built on power or ambition, but on kindness, education, and quiet confidence. Emily recognized him from the archives where he occasionally researched family records. They had exchanged polite greetings before, nothing more. "You performed beautifully," Ethan said gently. "It would be a shame if the evening ended without someone thanking you properly." Emily hesitated. She had never enjoyed becoming the center of attention, yet refusing a courteous invitation during the Moon Gala would itself become a conversation people remembered. She glanced toward the musicians, who continued playing as more couples entered the floor. "Only one dance," she answered softly. Ethan smiled. "Only one." Their hands met with the careful distance expected by royal etiquette. They stepped into the rhythm naturally, neither trying to impress the audience nor draw unnecessary attention. Emily quickly realized Ethan was an excellent dancer. His movements were steady and considerate, allowing her to relax as the music carried them around the ballroom. For the first time since entering Blackwood Palace, she almost forgot how many people surrounded them. Laughter floated gently through the room. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight like tiny stars. Conversations resumed as guests became more interested in one another than in the performers. It should have been an ordinary moment, simple enough to disappear into the evening without consequence. Yet something invisible shifted. Near the royal throne, several members of the king's guard exchanged uncertain glances. None of them spoke. They simply looked toward their king before quietly looking away again. Adrian Blackwood had not moved. His expression remained calm, almost detached, but those who had served beside him for years noticed details no outsider could recognize. His fingers, usually perfectly still against the carved armrest of the throne, tightened almost imperceptibly. His breathing slowed instead of quickened. His silver-gray eyes no longer rested on the moonlit windows. They followed a single figure crossing the ballroom. Emily laughed quietly at something Ethan had said about getting lost inside the endless palace library. The sound barely reached anyone else, but Adrian heard it with impossible clarity. Deep inside the silence he had mastered over countless years, another heartbeat answered. His wolf stirred from a sleep so complete, he had almost forgotten what it felt like. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was recognition without explanation, an ancient instinct rising before reason could speak. The sensation unsettled him. He had spent years teaching the powerful creature within him absolute discipline. It had obeyed through political ceremonies, royal negotiations, formal banquets, and every carefully arranged introduction presented by ambitious noble families. No scent, no smile, no carefully planned encounter had ever drawn even the smallest response. Yet now, while an ordinary archivist smiled at another man during a harmless dance, the silence inside him began to crack. Adrian remained perfectly composed, but his attention refused to leave the dance floor. Across the ballroom, Emily never once looked toward the throne. She still remembered the curator's warning and assumed the Alpha King had no reason to notice someone like her. She focused only on the music and the graceful patterns beneath her feet. Ethan thanked her again for accepting his invitation, unaware that several nearby guests had quietly begun watching them with growing curiosity. One whispered that the young beta seemed unusually comfortable beside the mysterious dancer from the archives. Another suggested the Brooks family might soon announce a courtship. The harmless rumors spread from one conversation to another as easily as candlelight traveled across crystal glass. None of them noticed the sudden stillness surrounding the royal throne. None of them understood why the palace wolves resting beyond the ballroom had quietly lifted their heads toward the moon at the exact same moment. The final notes of the dance drifted gently through the ballroom, but neither Emily nor Ethan hurried to step away. Royal etiquette encouraged conversation after a formal dance, and Ethan, always thoughtful, simply offered a warm smile while thanking her once more for sharing a tradition that most people had forgotten. Emily returned the smile with quiet gratitude, relieved that the performance had ended without embarrassment. She had no idea that what felt ordinary to her had already become the most discussed moment of the evening. Along the edges of the ballroom, conversations changed direction almost instantly. Noble women who had spent the last hour comparing jewels now leaned closer together, their voices lowered behind elegant fans. Elder council members paused their political discussions to glance toward the young pair near the center of the room. Servants moving through the crowd exchanged curious looks before continuing their duties as though nothing unusual had happened. Rumors in royal courts never needed proof. They only needed opportunity. "Who is she?" one aristocratic lady quietly asked. "The Archivist," another answered with polite indifference. "The one invited to perform the ancient moon waltz. And Lord Brooks chose her." Apparently, the answer carried more surprise than judgment, but surprise rarely remained harmless for long inside Blackwood Palace. Nearby, two younger noble women exchanged knowing smiles. Perhaps the Brooks family finally found a suitable bride. "An archivist," the other replied with a quiet laugh. Stranger things have happened. Their amusement spread no farther than a whisper, yet whispers had a remarkable way of finding new voices. Within minutes, entirely different versions of the same story floated across the ballroom. Some claimed Ethan had admired Emily for months during visits to the royal library. Others insisted the dance had been carefully arranged by influential families hoping to strengthen political connections. One particularly imaginative guest even suggested that an engagement announcement might be made before midnight. Emily remained blissfully unaware. She and Ethan had wandered toward a long balcony overlooking the palace gardens, where fresh autumn air drifted through the open doors. Moonlight washed across carefully trimmed hedges and silver fountains, creating a peaceful contrast to the lively celebration behind them. "I hope you did not mind my invitation," Ethan said sincerely. "Not at all," Emily answered. "You rescued me from standing alone while everyone else enjoyed the evening." Ethan laughed softly. "Then perhaps we rescued each other. Royal celebrations become exhausting after the third hour." Emily nodded with understanding. "I spend most evenings surrounded by books. Crowds are still something I am learning. Books can be better company than politicians," Ethan replied with an amused smile. Emily laughed, surprised by how easily the conversation flowed. There was no hidden intention in his words, only genuine kindness. She appreciated people who did not measure others by titles or family names. Behind them, several guests noticed the quiet conversation near the balcony. To those watching from a distance, the moment appeared far more intimate than reality. A few elderly nobles smiled approvingly, while others quietly calculated what such a match might mean for future alliances. Human imagination often filled empty spaces with stories more dramatic than the truth. None of them realized the greatest misunderstanding of the evening had nothing to do with Emily or Ethan at all. Across the ballroom, Adrian Blackwood remained seated upon the royal throne. His posture had not changed. His expression remained calm enough that anyone unfamiliar with him would assume complete indifference. Years of discipline had made him almost impossible to read. Yet Commander Lucas Hawthorne, captain of the Royal Guard and Adrian's oldest friend, noticed something deeply unusual. Lucas had stood beside the Alpha King during battles, negotiations, coronations, and moments when entire kingdoms waited for a single royal decision. Never once had he seen Adrian's attention fixed so completely upon one ordinary citizen. Lucas followed the king's line of sight until he found Emily standing beneath the balcony archway. The realization unsettled him. Adrian had ignored daughters of powerful alpha houses, foreign princesses, celebrated scholars, and decorated warriors with the same polite distance for years. Tonight, he seemed incapable of looking anywhere else. Lucas frowned almost imperceptibly. Something had changed. He simply did not understand what. Adrian himself could not explain it either. Every logical thought urged him to dismiss the strange feeling growing within him. The young woman had done nothing remarkable beyond performing a traditional dance and accepting an innocent invitation from a courteous gentleman. There was no reason she should occupy his thoughts. No reason his attention kept returning to the quiet smile she offered while speaking with Ethan. No reason his heartbeat felt strangely uneven whenever another man stood beside her. His mind rejected the feeling. His wolf did not. Deep inside the ancient bond that every alpha carried, the powerful creature paced restlessly through endless forests of instinct and memory. It recognized something that Adrian's human mind had not yet accepted. The wolf did not care about politics, noble families, or appearances. It understood only truth. Every time Emily laughed, however softly, the invisible connection grew stronger. Every second she remained beside Ethan, the restless energy inside Adrian became more difficult to ignore. Around the ballroom, other alpha wolves began showing subtle signs of unease. Some guests unconsciously adjusted their collars as though the room had become warmer. Others glanced toward the moonlit windows without knowing why. Even the palace hounds resting beyond the grand entrance quietly rose from their places, ears alert, sensing a shift in the atmosphere that no ordinary human could perceive. Emily finally thanked Ethan for the conversation and suggested they return before attracting unnecessary attention. Ethan agreed immediately, unaware that unnecessary attention had already found them long ago. Together they stepped back beneath the crystal chandeliers just as the orchestra prepared another elegant melody, while somewhere behind calm silver eyes, an ancient wolf continued waiting with a patience that was beginning to disappear. When Emily and Ethan returned from the balcony, the atmosphere inside the Crystal Moon Gala felt almost unchanged, yet something invisible had settled over the ballroom like the quiet stillness before the first snowfall. The orchestra welcomed them back with another elegant melody, this one brighter and more playful, inviting guests to mingle freely across the polished marble floor. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light over every smiling face, while conversations resumed with practiced sophistication. To most people, the evening remained flawless. Only a handful sensed that the air itself seemed unusually heavy. Emily thanked Ethan again for his kindness before they paused near one of the towering silver columns overlooking the dancers. "I should probably return to the musicians before people wonder where I disappeared," she said with an apologetic smile. Ethan shook his head gently. "They are probably grateful someone finally convinced you to enjoy your own celebration." Emily laughed softly. "It is not my celebration." "Perhaps not," Ethan replied, "but tonight would not have been the same without you." His words were simple, sincere, and spoken without the slightest intention beyond encouragement. Even so, several nearby guests overheard enough to exchange curious smiles. One elderly duchess quietly nudged the woman beside her. "Look how naturally they speak together." Her companion nodded thoughtfully. "They already seem comfortable." Another guest added with quiet confidence. "Comfort is often where lasting partnerships begin." None of them knew either Emily or Ethan well enough to understand that they had shared little more than occasional conversations inside the palace library over old historical records. Yet assumptions multiplied faster than facts inside royal courts. Every glance became evidence. Every smile became a promise. Every coincidence transformed into destiny. Emily remained blissfully unaware of the stories forming around her. She had spent most of her life surrounded by forgotten manuscripts rather than ambitious nobles. She still believed people usually meant exactly what they said. Ethan glanced toward the center of the ballroom, where several couples had already begun another traditional sequence. "Would you honor me with one more dance?" he asked politely. Emily hesitated only for a moment. The evening was nearly over, and refusing another courteous invitation now might appear unnecessarily cold after accepting the first. "One last dance," she agreed with a gentle smile. "Then I truly must return to my responsibilities." Ethan offered his hand again, maintaining the respectful distance expected during every formal royal gathering. They stepped together into the graceful rhythm as violins carried the melody across the ballroom. Their movements remained perfectly proper, neither hurried nor intimate. Simply two people enjoying an ancient tradition beneath the autumn moon. Across the room, Adrian Blackwood watched every step. His expression remained calm enough that no ordinary observer would question it. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing appeared steady. His hands rested exactly where they had all evening. Yet inside the silence he had built over countless years, the balance was beginning to fracture. His wolf no longer rested. It moved through his thoughts with growing urgency, refusing every command to remain still. The ancient instinct pushed against the walls of discipline he had constructed since becoming king. "Watch her," it whispered without words. "Go to her. Do not let another claim what belongs to the moon." Adrian closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. He had mastered every challenge expected of an alpha king. He had negotiated peace where others predicted war. He had ruled through harsh winters, poor harvests, and political unrest without allowing emotion to cloud his judgment. Losing control had never been an option, yet this feeling refused to obey reason. Commander Lucas noticed the subtle change immediately. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before relaxing again. The king's silver eyes opened, brighter than before, reflecting the moonlight pouring through the towering windows. Lucas quietly stepped closer. "Your Majesty," he said in a voice only Adrian could hear. "Is everything all right?" Adrian answered without shifting his gaze from the ballroom. "Yes." It was a truthful answer spoken by a man trying desperately to convince himself. Lucas studied him for another moment before respectfully stepping back. He trusted the king's judgment completely, yet something deep within his own instincts urged caution. Around the ballroom, other alpha guests unconsciously reacted as well. Conversation slowed. Several experienced warriors frowned toward the royal throne without understanding why. A decorated alpha general paused halfway through lifting his glass, distracted by an unfamiliar pressure settling across his shoulders. It was not fear. It was recognition. Every alpha present could sense an invisible presence awakening, even if none of them understood its source. Emily turned gracefully beneath Ethan's raised hand as the music carried them through another elegant sequence. Her pale blue dress shimmered beneath the crystal lights, catching fragments of silver moonlight with every gentle movement. She smiled, not because she wished to impress anyone, but because dancing reminded her of the forgotten stories hidden inside the ancient books she loved. To her, every step honored history rather than drawing attention. That simple joy became the final thread holding Adrian's control together. His wolf watched another man share that smile and answered with a restless longing unlike anything he had experienced before. Not anger, not jealousy in its ordinary form. Something older, something instinctive, something that belonged to the oldest promises ever whispered beneath a full moon. Outside the palace walls, clouds slowly drifted away from the harvest moon, allowing brilliant silver light to flood the kingdom below. At that exact moment, every wolf resting within the royal sanctuary quietly lifted its head toward the sky, their ears alert as though answering a call carried on the night wind. While inside the ballroom, no one yet realized that destiny had already taken its first irreversible step. The melody continued with effortless elegance, but the ballroom no longer felt the same. It was as though every note carried an invisible echo that only a few could hear. Emily remained focused on the rhythm, following each graceful step exactly as she had learned from faded pages preserved inside the royal archives. Ethan matched her movements with quiet confidence, smiling whenever she hesitated before a difficult turn. Around them, other couples filled the marble floor, their laughter blending with the orchestra until the celebration seemed almost timeless. Yet beneath the polished surface of the evening, something ancient had begun to awaken. Adrian Blackwood slowly drew a measured breath, hoping the familiar discipline that had guided him through countless trials would silence the restless presence within him. It did not. His wolf paced through the quiet corners of his mind with increasing determination, every graceful movement Emily made drawing its attention more completely. The creature had remained silent for years, content to watch the world through the king's calm restraint. Tonight, silence was no longer enough. It sensed a truth that words could not explain, a bond that had existed long before either of them had taken their first breath. Adrian pressed one hand lightly against the carved wooden armrest of the throne, grounding himself in something solid. The polished oak answered with familiar stillness, but the steady comfort lasted only a moment. Somewhere across the ballroom, Emily laughed softly after nearly missing one turn before quickly finding the rhythm again. Ethan chuckled with her, assuring her that no one else had noticed. The sound drifted through the hall like a gentle breeze. Adrian's wolf answered immediately. A powerful wave of instinct surged through him, not demanding anger or conflict, but insisting with absolute certainty that the woman laughing beneath the moonlight should not feel like a stranger. She should not stand beyond his reach. She should not smile at another while remaining invisible to him. Adrian closed his eyes for the briefest instant, steadying his heartbeat before opening them once more. His expression remained composed, yet Commander Lucas Hawthorne recognized another subtle change. The silver in the king's eyes seemed brighter than before, reflecting the moonlight with an intensity Lucas had never witnessed outside the oldest legends told by palace historians. Nearby, several members of the royal guard unconsciously straightened their posture. None of them received an order. None of them understood why every instinct urged them to remain alert. The sensation spread quietly through the ballroom. Experienced alpha guests exchanged uncertain glances. A respected elder paused in the middle of his conversation, his wolf stirring without explanation. One young alpha reached for his glass only to stop halfway, distracted by a strange vibration beneath his fingertips. Crystal goblets resting on nearby tables began producing faint, almost musical chimes, although no one had touched them. The sound was delicate enough that many guests dismissed it as part of the orchestra. Others looked around in mild confusion before returning to their conversations. Emily noticed nothing unusual. She was smiling at Ethan as the music guided them through another graceful circle across the ballroom. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I think tonight will become one of my favorite memories." Ethan smiled warmly. "I was about to say the same thing." His words carried only friendship and honest appreciation, yet several nearby nobles interpreted them very differently. Quiet smiles appeared once again. A gentleman from the eastern provinces whispered something to his wife, who nodded with visible approval. Across the room, another family quietly speculated that the Brooks household might soon announce exciting news. Rumors continued weaving themselves into stories that existed only in imagination. Then the first unmistakable sign appeared. One crystal glass resting untouched upon a silver serving tray released a clear, delicate tone before a thin line spread slowly across its surface. A servant blinked in surprise, wondering whether the temperature inside the ballroom had somehow changed. Before anyone could comment, another glass answered with the same gentle sound. Then another. Tiny silver vibrations shimmered through the crystal collection like invisible ripples across still water. The orchestra continued playing, but even the musicians began exchanging uncertain glances. The chandelier nearest the royal throne swayed almost imperceptibly, although there was no wind inside the sealed ballroom. Hundreds of hanging crystals reflected moonlight in countless directions, filling the hall with dancing flashes of silver. Several guests looked upward in quiet confusion. "Did you feel that?" someone whispered. "Perhaps the old palace settled," another answered, though the explanation sounded uncertain even to its speaker. Commander Lucas slowly turned toward the throne. Adrian had not moved. He remained seated with perfect posture, every outward sign reflecting calm authority. Yet Lucas could now feel the invisible pressure surrounding the king. It was not threatening. It was overwhelming in the same quiet way standing beside the ocean reminded a person of its endless depth. Years of serving beside Adrian had taught Lucas to recognize moments when extraordinary restraint hid extraordinary power. This was one of those moments. Outside the towering windows, the harvest moon emerged completely from behind the drifting clouds, flooding the ballroom with brilliant silver light. The beams crossed the polished marble floor before gently surrounding Emily as she completed another graceful turn. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Adrian's wolf rose fully to its feet within him. It no longer whispered. It no longer waited. It simply stood in complete certainty, its ancient instinct recognizing what the king's human heart had not yet dared to believe. while throughout Blackwood Palace every royal wolf lifted its face toward the glowing moon, answering a silent call that had finally begun. The final notes of the orchestra lingered beneath the crystal ceiling as though the entire ballroom had become suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Emily slowed naturally with the music, smiling politely as Ethan guided them through the final graceful turn before releasing her hand with the same courtesy he had shown from the beginning. Around them, applause rose from the gathered guests, celebrating another flawless performance without realizing that something far greater than music had reached its breaking point. Adrian Blackwood remained motionless for one long breath. Then, without warning, he stood. The sound was almost imperceptible, the quiet movement of polished shoes against marble, yet the effect spread across the ballroom instantly. Conversation stopped in the middle of unfinished sentences. The musicians lowered their instruments one by one until the last violin fell silent. Servants carrying silver trays instinctively paused where they stood. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the royal throne. For years, the Alpha King had never interrupted a celebration without reason. Tonight, no one understood what reason could possibly draw him onto the ballroom floor. Commander Lucas watched carefully but did not interfere. He recognized the remarkable calm in Adrian's posture. There was no anger on the king's face, no frustration, no impatience, only absolute certainty. Adrian descended the broad marble steps at an unhurried pace, each measured footstep echoing softly through the silent hall. His long black coat moved gently behind him while silver moonlight reflected across its embroidered edges. Every guest instinctively stepped aside, opening a clear path through the center of the ballroom without receiving a single command. Emily noticed the movement only when Ethan's expression suddenly changed. His warm smile disappeared, replaced by respectful surprise as he looked beyond her shoulder. Emily slowly turned. For the first time that evening, her eyes met the Alpha King's. The old curator's warning flashed through her memory. Never look directly into the Alpha King's eyes. But it was already too late. She had expected cold authority, perhaps even distant indifference. Instead, she found something impossible to describe. Adrian's silver-gray eyes held no accusation, no judgment, no royal pride. They reflected recognition, quiet and profound, as though he had spent years searching for something he had never fully understood until this moment. Emily felt the strange sensation of familiarity again, the same feeling that had brushed against her heart during the first dance. It was gentle, comforting, and completely beyond explanation. The ballroom disappeared around her. The whispered rumors, the glittering chandeliers, the endless rows of noble families all faded into silence while the king's gaze remained fixed upon hers. Adrian stopped only a few feet away. Ethan immediately bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." Adrian acknowledged him with a small nod, never allowing his attention to drift far from Emily. The silence stretched across the ballroom. Every noble family waited. Every member of the royal guard remained perfectly still. Even the palace musicians held their breath. Emily lowered her head respectfully. "Your Majesty," she said softly, uncertain why her heartbeat had become so uneven. Adrian spoke for the first time since entering the ballroom that evening. His voice was calm, steady, and carried effortlessly through the vast hall. "Would you honor me with the next dance?" The question landed with greater force than any royal decree. Hundreds of astonished expressions turned toward Emily. For 5 years, the Alpha King had declined every invitation extended to him. Noble daughters from the oldest families had waited for a single opportunity that never came. Distinguished guests from neighboring kingdoms had quietly accepted that Adrian Blackwood simply did not dance. Yet he had crossed an entire ballroom to ask an unknown archivist for one dance. Emily blinked in complete disbelief. "Me?" she asked before she could stop herself. A faint warmth touched Adrian's otherwise composed expression. "Yes, you." Emily hesitated, overwhelmed by the impossible attention surrounding her. She glanced briefly toward Ethan, who offered an encouraging smile before stepping back. "The invitation belongs to you," he said kindly. "You should accept it." Emily slowly placed her hand into Adrian's waiting hand. The instant their fingertips touched, neither of them moved. A quiet breath swept through the ballroom as though every person present had unconsciously inhaled at exactly the same moment. The crystal glasses that had been softly humming throughout the evening fell perfectly silent. The invisible pressure lingering inside the hall vanished, replaced by a deep and peaceful stillness. Adrian felt his restless wolf stop pacing for the first time all night. The ancient creature simply stood beside him in complete contentment, as though the endless search it had carried through countless silent years had finally reached its destination. Emily looked up again, surprised by the unexpected calm washing over her own heart. The unexplained nervousness she had carried since arriving at the palace dissolved into quiet warmth. She could not understand why standing beside the Alpha King felt strangely familiar, only that it did. Around them, the guests watched in stunned silence while moonlight poured through the towering windows, surrounding the two figures standing together at the center of the ballroom. And somewhere deep within the oldest magic of the kingdom, a forgotten promise quietly began to awaken. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The grand ballroom remained wrapped in complete silence, as though even time itself had paused to witness the impossible. Emily stood in the center of the polished marble floor with her hand resting lightly in Adrian Blackwood's. She could still feel the warmth of his touch, steady and reassuring, strangely familiar despite the fact that they had never truly met. The uneasiness that had followed her throughout the evening had vanished, replaced by a quiet peace she could not explain. Adrian noticed it as well. The constant restlessness inside him had disappeared the moment their hands touched. His wolf no longer searched. It no longer questioned. The ancient creature stood calmly beside him, its powerful presence filled with complete certainty. There was only one truth it recognized, and it accepted that truth without hesitation. Emily Carter belonged within its world. The orchestra looked uncertain until the elderly conductor slowly lifted his baton once more. Without receiving instructions from anyone, the musicians began playing an old melody that had not been performed at the Moon Gala for generations. Several historians attending the celebration immediately recognized the forgotten composition. It was known as the Moon's Promise, a ceremonial dance believed to appear only when destiny itself called two lives together. Murmurs quietly spread through the gathered nobles. That song has not been played in decades. I thought the original score had been lost. No, the palace archives restored it years ago. The Archivist. Every curious glance returned to Emily. She looked toward the musicians with visible surprise. She had spent countless evenings restoring damaged pages containing that very melody, never imagining she would one day hear it performed inside the royal ballroom. Adrian offered a gentle nod. "May I?" he asked softly. Emily smiled, still overwhelmed by everything happening around her. "Yes, Your Majesty." They stepped forward together as the ancient music filled the hall. Adrian danced with remarkable grace, despite his reputation for never joining royal celebrations. Every movement was effortless, calm, and perfectly matched to Emily's rhythm as though they had practiced together for years. Neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary. They simply followed the music while moonlight flowed through the towering windows, surrounding them with soft silver light. Guests watched in complete amazement. The Alpha King, who had refused every invitation, now moved across the ballroom with quiet confidence beside a woman almost no one had noticed before that evening. There was nothing dramatic about the dance. No grand display meant to impress the court. Its beauty came from perfect harmony. Every step seemed natural. Every turn carried effortless trust. It felt less like two strangers learning to dance together and more like two paths finally crossing after traveling separately for a very long time. Then another extraordinary moment unfolded. As Emily completed a graceful turn beneath Adrian's raised hand, a gentle silver glow appeared against the delicate bracelet she wore on her left wrist. At first she believed it was simply moonlight reflecting from the nearby chandeliers. But the light remained. It slowly brightened until tiny silver patterns began appearing across the surface of the bracelet itself. Emily stopped in surprise. "What is happening?" she whispered. Adrian looked down. His calm expression changed for the first time that evening. Not with fear, but with unmistakable wonder. The intricate pattern continued spreading across the silver bracelet before extending softly onto Emily's skin, forming delicate lines that resembled intertwining vines beneath the moonlight. They shimmered only for a few moments before settling into a graceful crescent moon surrounded by tiny stars. The elderly royal historian standing near the orchestra suddenly inhaled sharply. His eyes widened behind thin spectacles. "The moon's blessing," he whispered. Several members of the royal council turned toward him immediately. "Impossible," one counselor quietly answered. The historian slowly shook his head without taking his eyes off the glowing symbol. "Not impossible. Forgotten." The ballroom grew silent again. Every ancient story preserved inside the royal library spoke of a rare blessing granted by the moon goddess when two destined souls finally recognized one another. Most believed the legends were symbolic rather than literal. None of the younger generation had ever witnessed such a sign with their own eyes. Emily stared at the glowing crescent on her wrist in complete disbelief. "I have never seen this before." Adrian gently raised his own hand. Resting just beneath the sleeve of his formal jacket, hidden from public view for years, was a faint silver mark shaped like a lone crescent moon. As moonlight touched his skin, the ancient mark quietly brightened until it matched the symbol resting upon Emily's wrist. Soft, astonished whispers filled the hall once again. Commander Lucas looked from one glowing mark to the other before slowly lowering his head with quiet understanding. The unexplained changes throughout the evening suddenly made sense. The restless wolves, the humming crystal, the forgotten melody, the impossible calm that followed their first touch. None of it had been coincidence. Ethan watched from only a few feet away, surprise softening into a genuine smile. Instead of disappointment, he felt relief. Looking at Adrian and Emily together, he realized he had never truly been part of the story unfolding before him. He had simply been the kind-hearted friend who unknowingly led destiny to the place where it had always intended to arrive. Above them, the harvest moon shone brighter than ever before, bathing the ballroom in silver light, while the ancient symbols resting upon two quiet hearts continued glowing with a promise that had waited patiently across countless years for this single unforgettable night. The silver glow slowly faded from Emily's wrist, but the silence inside the ballroom remained untouched. No one hurried to speak. No one dared interrupt the moment that had unfolded before their eyes. The ancient crescent resting upon Emily's skin remained visible even after its light settled into a gentle shimmer, matching the mark hidden beneath Adrian Blackwood's sleeve. For generations, the moon's blessing had survived only as a story preserved in fragile books and fading songs. Tonight, every person inside Blackwood Palace had witnessed the impossible become real. Emily lowered her eyes to the delicate symbol on her wrist, still struggling to understand what had happened. She had arrived at the Crystal Moon Gala believing she would perform one traditional dance before quietly returning to her peaceful life among shelves filled with forgotten history. Instead, history itself had reached out and placed her at its center. Adrian watched her with the same calm certainty that had replaced every trace of unrest inside him. For the first time in years, his wolf rested peacefully, no longer searching through endless instinct for something it could not name. It had found its answer. The great hall remained motionless until the oldest member of the royal council slowly stepped forward. Lord Benjamin Ashcroft had served 3 generations of monarchs, and few living people understood the kingdom's traditions more completely than he did. His silver hair reflected the moonlight as he approached the center of the ballroom, before placing one hand over his heart and lowering his head toward Emily. Gasps quietly spread through the gathered nobles. A royal counselor did not bow lightly. He bowed only before the throne or before traditions older than the throne itself. "The moon has spoken," Lord Ashcroft said with quiet reverence. "The kingdom recognizes what destiny has revealed." One by one, other members of the royal council followed his example. Experienced alpha leaders who had spent decades negotiating borders, settling disputes, and protecting their territories lowered their heads with the same solemn respect. Distinguished scholars from the Royal Academy placed their hands over their hearts. Even foreign diplomats who did not fully understand the ancient blessing instinctively recognized that they were witnessing something beyond politics. Emily looked around in disbelief. "Please," she said softly, almost overwhelmed. "You do not have to." Lord Ashcroft gently interrupted her with a warm smile. "Miss Carter, tonight this respect is not given because of your family name, your position, or your accomplishments. It is given because the moon has entrusted you with something no person can earn through ambition alone." Emily's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She had spent years believing she would always remain unnoticed, comfortable in the peaceful corners of libraries, while others shaped history. Never had she imagined becoming part of the stories she loved preserving. Nearby, Ethan Brooks stepped forward with the same gracious smile that had never left him throughout the evening. He offered Adrian a respectful bow before turning toward Emily. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "I believe the archives will have to find someone else to organize the oldest manuscripts for a while." Emily laughed softly through her surprise. "You make it sound as though my life has already changed." Ethan smiled. "I think it already has." Adrian looked toward Ethan with quiet appreciation. "You treated her with kindness before anyone understood who she was." Ethan answered without hesitation. "She deserved kindness before tonight, as much as she deserves respect after tonight." Adrian inclined his head. "Then the kingdom owes you its gratitude as well." The simple exchange carried through the silent ballroom, reaching every noble family gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers. Those who had spent the evening inventing rumors about political advantage quietly reflected upon how quickly appearances could deceive. Emily had never sought attention, influence, or recognition. She had simply remained true to herself. That quiet sincerity now shone brighter than every jeweled crown in the room. Commander Lucas Hawthorne smiled to himself for the first time all evening. Watching the Alpha King standing beside Emily, he recognized a version of Adrian that had been absent for many years. The quiet distance that had surrounded the king seemed lighter now, replaced by a calm warmth that transformed the atmosphere around him without diminishing his strength. The palace musicians, encouraged by the peaceful mood filling the hall, gently resumed the ancient melody of the moon's promise. This time, guests throughout the ballroom joined the dance together. Noble families, scholars, servants, visiting dignitaries, and honored guests moved across the marble floor without concern for rank or title. For one extraordinary evening, the celebration became exactly what the oldest traditions had always intended it to be, a gathering united beneath the same moon. Emily stood quietly beside Adrian, watching the joyful scene unfold before her. "I still do not understand why this happened," she admitted. Adrian looked toward the brilliant harvest moon shining beyond the towering windows before returning his gaze to her. "Neither do I," he answered honestly. "But some truths do not ask to be understood before they ask to be trusted." Emily followed his gaze toward the silver light spilling across the palace gardens. For reasons she could not explain, those words felt deeply familiar, as though she had always known them without ever hearing them spoken. Around them, the kingdom celebrated a blessing it believed had returned after generations of silence, while far beyond the palace walls, beneath the same glowing moon, ancient forces older than memory quietly stirred, answering a promise that had only just begun to awaken. Long after the final dance had ended, the crystal moon gala slowly faded into quiet conversation as guests departed beneath the silver glow of the harvest moon. The palace corridors, filled only hours earlier with music and celebration, now echoed with calm footsteps and respectful farewells. Servants carefully extinguished rows of candles, while musicians packed away instruments that had unexpectedly become part of history. Yet no one hurried to leave Blackwood Palace completely. Every person who had witnessed the ancient blessing understood they would spend the rest of their lives remembering this extraordinary evening. Emily stood alone for a few peaceful moments on the eastern terrace overlooking the royal gardens. A cool autumn breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh earth through the moonlit air as silver light rested gently across the stone pathways below. She lifted her wrist once more, studying the delicate crescent that remained upon her skin. The glow had faded into a soft shimmer, but the symbol itself had not disappeared. It looked as though it had always belonged there. She lightly traced the mark with her fingertips, wondering how one ordinary evening had transformed everything she believed about herself. Quiet footsteps approached behind her. She turned to find Adrian walking onto the terrace without the formality that usually surrounded the Alpha King. There were no guards standing nearby, no council members waiting for instructions, no nobles hoping to gain his attention. For the first time that night, he simply looked like a man enjoying the peaceful silence beneath the moon. "The palace becomes much quieter after everyone leaves," Adrian said with a faint smile. Emily nodded. "I think I like it better this way." Adrian glanced toward the gardens stretching beyond the terrace. "So do I." They stood together without speaking for several comfortable moments. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt familiar, as though neither of them needed words to explain the calm they shared. Finally, Emily looked toward him. "Do you believe destiny always feels this unexpected?" Adrian considered the question before answering honestly. "I believe destiny rarely announces itself before it arrives." Emily smiled softly. "That sounds like something hidden inside one of the old books." Adrian returned the smile. "Perhaps the old books understood people better than we realized." Before Emily could answer, another presence quietly approached the terrace. The sound of a wooden staff tapping gently against polished stone drew both of their attention. An elderly man wearing deep blue ceremonial robes stepped into the moonlight. His white hair rested neatly against his shoulders, and his thoughtful eyes reflected years of wisdom that seemed almost impossible to measure. Adrian immediately inclined his head with quiet respect. "Master Orion." Emily noticed the gesture with surprise. She had never seen the Alpha King greet anyone with such visible reverence. Master Orion served as the kingdom's oldest royal seer, a guardian of ancient prophecies whose guidance was requested only during the rarest moments in history. The elderly man smiled warmly at Emily before his attention settled upon the crescent mark resting on her wrist. His gentle expression slowly changed into thoughtful silence. He stepped closer without speaking and carefully studied the silver symbol beneath the moonlight. Several long moments passed before he quietly exhaled. "Remarkable," he whispered. Adrian frowned slightly. "You recognize the blessing?" Master Orion nodded once. "I recognize part of it." Emily exchanged a curious glance with Adrian. "Part of it?" she asked softly. The old seer lifted his eyes toward the brilliant harvest moon shining above Blackwood Palace. "For centuries, our people believed the moon's blessing marked the future Luna who would stand beside the Alpha King." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "Tonight, I realized we remembered only half the story." Adrian's calm expression became serious once again. "What have we forgotten?" Master Orion slowly reached into the folds of his robe and removed a weathered parchment protected inside an aged leather case. The edges had faded with time, yet the ancient ink remained remarkably clear beneath the moonlight. He carefully unfolded the document before placing it into Adrian's hands. Emily leaned closer. At the top of the parchment rested a drawing of a familiar crescent surrounded by tiny stars, identical to the mark upon her wrist. Beneath the illustration, a single sentence had been written in elegant script older than the kingdom itself. Master Orion spoke the words aloud with quiet reverence. "When the first crescent returns beneath the harvest moon, the Alpha King will not merely find his destined queen. Together, they will awaken the promise that has slept since the first Luna walked beneath the stars." Emily felt a quiet shiver of wonder. "The first Luna?" she whispered. The old seer slowly nodded. The woman remembered in every legend did not simply become a queen. His thoughtful eyes met hers with gentle certainty. She changed the destiny of every wolf that followed. Adrian looked from the ancient parchment to the silver mark glowing softly upon Emily's wrist before raising his eyes toward the endless sky above the palace. Neither of them spoke. They no longer needed to. Far beyond the royal gardens, hidden deep within forests untouched for countless generations, the ancient stones of a forgotten sanctuary quietly began glowing beneath the same harvest moon, waiting patiently for the two souls whose story had only just begun.